People constantly say, you can get a PhD in financial security just by knowing the Proverbs. God puts it all there. How we should handle money, how we should handle life, how we should handle marriage, how we should handle kids. All of that's in there. So where did this king go wrong? Where did all of this begin to turn south for Solomon? Now, I don't know whether it was 20 years into his ministry, 30 years into his reign. I don't know how long it was. But it says slowly, over time, Solomon got this entitlement mentality. He thought that he was supreme being. And so all these little things should just come to him naturally. And he looked around and he saw all these women from other countries, other nations, these very exotic peoples. And he wanted to forge some alliances with their fathers. So he says, well, I'll marry them. They will become my wives. And it's really hard to go to battle against a son-in-law, isn't it? Well, most of the time. And Solomon forges all of these relationships. In fact, in the end, it says that Solomon had over 700 wives and over 300 concubines, which is just another fancier word for saying he had 300 more wives. So in all, he had about 1,000 wives. Now, for those of us that have one and have a hard time with that, having 1,000, that doesn't even seem like a good idea. And you know that in the Old Testament time, it didn't matter whether you were a king or a commoner, you had to spend the same amount of time with every wife. That was the law. So if you spent a certain amount of time with one wife, you had to spend it with every one of them. Do the math. Figure out how much time Solomon spent with each wife. Not much. But beyond that, the other thing that it built up was this whole arms dealer kind of mentality. Solomon became the arms dealer for the world. It said that Solomon made his fortune in what? Horses and chariots. Now that may sound like a good state fair kind of endeavor, but it's not then. Horses and chariots were like the nuclear arms of the day. In a day and age when people went to battle by foot, when they went with bows and arrows and spears and swords, having horses and chariots was a big deal. If you could ride into battle, if you could sit 5 feet above your enemy, if you could cover the distance in half the time or a third the time, you had a great advantage over everyone else. And it says Solomon made his fortune by selling horses and chariots to all the surrounding nations. How did he do that? Well, by forging all these political alliances, by marrying all these daughters, by building a kingdom where he trusted in his own strength, his own wisdom, his own understanding, rather than that of God. Even that may sound fairly innocuous. Got to make a living, right? Got to build an income. Got to have a kingdom if you're a king. But there was a problem with that. You see, one of the commandments that God had was that you couldn't marry foreign women. Now that sounds a bit discriminatory, right? Except if you understand why God was saying that. He said, if you marry women from outside of Israel, what will happen? Well, they come not only with their clothes, not only with their cattle, not only with their dowry, not only with their family or anyone else, they come with their gods. They come with their gods. And when you come with your gods, it doesn't take long before you begin to think that those gods aren't all that bad. And after you think that they're not all that bad, it's not too long before you think, there's some real advantage in some of these gods. Until finally you begin to forget the God of Israel. and you turn your hearts toward them. So you see, it wasn't as though Solomon got up in the morning and thought that he would destroy this trust relationship with God. It wasn't that he got up and said, I think I'll just throw away all of this abundance for nothing. It's that it creeped up on him. All these little decisions that he thought really didn't make any difference at all made a huge difference. The political alliances, the selling of horses and chariots, the marrying of foreign wives, the taking of their gods, all took a toll not only on Solomon but on Israel itself. We know how from this point on the kingdom goes downhill. The kingdom gets worse and worse and worse. It fractures into more and more segments. It starts by splitting into two distinct nations, and then descends into tribal warfare, and then into kings who take advantage of their people who don't even follow God. If you start reading from this point on, you'll find that it says, and this particular king did worse than all the other kings before him. And you think that that's bad until you read the next one, and it says, and this one was even worse. And you think that's as bad as it can get until you read the next one, and it says, and this one did even worse than the last one. In other words, there's practically no limit to the depths of depravity that they can sink. And it all starts, it starts with some of the sins that David committed, didn't it? David, this epitome of what it means to be a man after God's own heart, still had his own sinfulness, still had his own frailties. And they pass on to Solomon. It wasn't as though the whole thing started out perfect and innocent. Even the succession wasn't all that peaceful. Adonijah, David's oldest son. Now, he should have been rightly the one that inherited the kingdom, right? But he doesn't. You see, David wants his first living son with Bathsheba to be king. And that would be who? Solomon. So when David gets old and Adonijah decides to declare himself king, doesn't even wait for the prophets, doesn't wait for his dad to die. Yeah, there's really good family dynamics, right? Imagine going home at Thanksgiving in that household. Well, son, what is this? I heard you declared yourself king. Well, that's all nice. David is wise enough to know that this can't hold. This can't stay. And so immediately, when he hears word from Nathan the prophet that Adonijah has already done this, he pulls Solomon aside. He brings Nathan into the picture. They anoint Solomon as king, which is probably why Solomon started when he was so young. Couldn't wait. It was either now or never. And so now immediately you've got this family warfare going on. Now, Solomon had been really smart. If Solomon had acted in a very worldly, kingly way, he would have put Adonijah to death. Not only that, he probably would have put all of his other siblings to death as well. One way you secure your hold on power within a family succession is to make sure there is no more family. Right? But as he started well, Solomon says, if I find that Adonijah is good, that his heart is right with God, then he shall live. But if I discover that it is evil, then he shall surely die. Solomon exercised good wisdom right from the beginning. And unfortunately, we see throughout all of this chapter how all of that wisdom kind of crumbles away